The desert airfield was covered in a fine layer of dust, kicked up by the heavy blades of helicopters that had just touched down. The noise of engines and boots striking the ground filled the tense silence that had settled before their arrival. Navy SEAL Commander Michael Murphy stepped onto the runway, his eyes sharp, scanning the perimeter as if the air itself could conceal an enemy. His men fanned out behind him with perfect discipline, yet his gaze caught something unusual that made him stop mid-step. At the far edge of the airstrip, crouched beside a long sniper rifle, was a woman. She was calm, focused, and seemed immune to the chaos of the landing zone. Her hands were steady as she adjusted the scope caps on her Barrett .50 caliber rifle, as though she had done it 1,000 times before. She wasn't like the others, and Murphy could feel it. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from. And if you love these stories, hit subscribe now. The next one will blow your mind, and it's even crazier. The SEALs around Murphy noticed. Her too. Whispers passed quickly among them, muffled by the roar of rotor blades but charged with skepticism. "Who is she?" one muttered. Another sneered, "Must be lost. This isn't a playground." Yet Murphy didn't laugh. His sharp eyes had caught a detail others hadn't. On her shoulder was a faded insignia, one that no one had seen in years. It was the mark of the Phantom unit, a ghostly emblem of a skull with broken wings. Rumors swirled about that unit, a Black Ops team whispered to be made up of soldiers too dangerous for official records. Some claimed legends like Chris Kyle once crossed paths with them. Others believed the unit never really existed. But Murphy knew better, and now the symbol was staring back at him from her sleeve. Her name was Sergeant Claire Donovan, though. Most of the men only knew her by rumors. She had been there in missions where others didn't return, where the line between survival and death was thinner than a knife's edge. Her calmness was unshakable, her reputation both feared and doubted. As she clicked the final cap into place on the Barrett's scope, she lifted her eyes to Murphy's. For a moment, the commander saw not just a soldier, but a survivor who had walked through shadows and returned carrying them on her shoulders. Before anyone could question further, a siren wailed through the airfield. The distant thump of mortar fire rattled the ground, and a frantic call came through the comms. Insurgents had breached the outer wall. Panic flickered across some faces, but Claire remained still, her rifle already angled toward the growing threat. With a slow breath, she settled the stock against her shoulder. One squeeze, then another. 2 bodies fell instantly at half a mile's distance. The SEALs froze, realizing she wasn't just steady, she was surgical. In seconds, she dropped. 3 more targets, each round precise and final. The men who had mocked her minutes before stood silent, their doubt stripped away with every echo of her shots. Murphy didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and spoke with a voice that cut through the chaos. "You lead this op." The order stunned everyone. A female sniper, an outsider with a ghost insignia, was now in charge of seasoned SEALs. But Murphy's eyes never left hers. He trusted what he had seen, the insignia, the precision, the unbreakable composure. Claire rose, slinging the Barrett over her shoulder and drawing her sidearm. "Then let's move," she said calmly, as if the battlefield belonged to her. The squad followed her through the smoke and fire, navigating collapsing structures and gunfire. Her instincts were razor-sharp. She directed fire teams into cover before ambushes struck, spotted traps where others would have walked blindly, and guided the SEALs with a confidence born from living on the edge of death. Every step deeper into the compound was chaos. Bullets cracked overhead, explosions lit the night sky, and the cries of battle rose around them. Yet Claire was unshaken. At one point, when the team was pinned down by machine gun fire, she slid into position without hesitation. With the Barrett's scope aligned, she fired a single round that shattered the enemy's defense. The path cleared instantly, and the SEALs advanced again. Her courage bled into them, and men who had doubted her only an hour earlier now followed, without question. By midnight, the compound was a graveyard of silence. Smoke rose in the distance, but no more gunfire came. The insurgents had been dismantled piece by piece, and the SEALs stood together, battered but alive. Claire lowered her weapon, scanning the horizon one last time. The insignia on her shoulder caught the faint glow of the burning debris, the phantom emblem no longer just a rumor. Murphy walked up to her, his expression caught between awe and respect. The others gathered behind him, their silence heavy, not from doubt anymore, but from recognition. They had fought beside someone who bore the ghosts of legends and carried them with honor. The Phantom Unit had always been spoken of as myth, but tonight, the myth had led them to victory. For the first time, the whispers among the SEALs were not mocking, but reverent. They had seen her courage, her precision, her unshakable will in the face of chaos. Claire Donovan had earned not just their respect, but their silence, the kind reserved for warriors who spoke louder with action than with words. As dawn broke over the horizon, the airfield was quiet again. The helicopters waited, engines humming softly. The men who had once laughed now glanced at her with pride. Murphy gave her a nod that carried the weight of unspoken brotherhood, and as she walked toward the rising sun, the phantom insignia gleamed, faintly, reminding them all that sometimes the deadliest legends are the ones who walk among us. The ruins of Fallujah burned in the distance, sending black smoke twisting into the darkening sky. The streets were eerily quiet, yet every soldier who had walked them before knew silence in this city meant danger. Navy SEAL Commander Richard Marchenko moved with his team through the debris-strewn outskirts, his senses sharpened by years of combat. He had been in places like this before, streets that felt haunted, walls that whispered ambush. His team trusted his instincts, but even Marchenko felt an unusual weight that night, as if something unexpected was about to happen. Ahead, near the skeleton of a bombed-out building, he spotted her. A lone figure crouched in the rubble, her rifle laid across her knees, her hands carefully tightening the scope caps with mechanical precision. She didn't flinch at the sound of boots or the low thrum of danger hanging over the city. She seemed carved from stone, her movements deliberate, her concentration unbroken. Marchenko slowed his pace, his eyes narrowing. A woman, here, at the edge of Fallujah's deadliest zone? His men exchanged looks, muttering under their breath. Some smirked, others shook their heads. But Marchenko wasn't laughing. He had seen too much to dismiss what didn't fit. Something about her presence unsettled him. Her helmet sat low on her head, shadows concealing much of her face, but her eyes lifted briefly to meet his. They were steady, unblinking, as though she had already measured him and found him ordinary. Marchenko almost smiled at the audacity of it. Then he noticed what no one else had yet seen. On her vest, just barely visible under the dirt and torn fabric, was a faint insignia. His breath caught. The Phantom Unit. The mark was rare, almost mythical. A stylized skull with fractured wings. Soldiers spoke of it in whispers, late at night, when the line between truth and story blurred. The Phantom Unit was said to be the place where warriors disappeared. Men and women too dangerous, too skilled, or too scarred to remain in official records. They fought wars the world never admitted existed. Some legends claimed Chris Kyle had seen one of them. Others swore SAS legends like Andy McNabb had crossed paths with a ghost from that same brotherhood. But no one had proof, until now. Marchenko froze, staring at the insignia. It wasn't possible, and yet it was right there, stitched into the vest of the woman kneeling before him. He didn't have time to ask questions. The sound of mortars cut through the night. The ground shook violently, and the air filled with dust. Shouts erupted over the radio. Insurgents advancing, pressure building on every side. The quiet city had turned into a storm in seconds. Before his men could react, the woman moved. She slid prone onto the rubble, her L-115A3 sniper rifle snapping into place with practiced ease. The weapon itself carried weight, Britain's most legendary long-range rifle. She steadied her breathing, and then the world seemed to pause. 3. Rounds, 3 flashes, 3 distant silhouettes dropped in perfect silence. The mortar team had been dismantled in less than 30 seconds. The SEALs froze. Some stared with wide eyes. Others swallowed their words. The woman stood, calmly reloading, her voice steady. "They'll try again from the south alley. You've got less than a minute." She wasn't guessing. She knew. Marcinko gave no orders at first. He simply studied her. There was no panic. In her movements, no hesitation. She moved like someone who had fought battles far darker than this one. Against every instinct that told him to guard his command, he made the call. "You're running point!" The reaction was immediate. His men turned in disbelief. "Sir," one started. Another cursed under his breath. Marcinko cut them off with a glare. He'd made his decision, and it wasn't up for debate. The Phantom Insignia wasn't decoration. He knew the weight it carried, even if they didn't. The woman, Lieutenant Sarah Kane, nodded once, neither surprised nor hesitant. She lifted her rifle, adjusted her helmet, and stepped into the lead. The team followed, though uneasily, moving through the twisted alleys of Fallujah. Every corner held shadows, every rooftop a possible sniper's nest. Yet Sarah seemed to sense the threats before they appeared. She signaled with hand motions, shifted formations, and more than once directed fire seconds before an ambush struck. At one intersection, gunfire erupted from above. Tracers carved the night, pinning the team in the open. Before anyone could react, Sarah dropped to a knee, sighted through her scope, and fired a single round. The machine gunner crumpled, his weapon silent. "Move!" she ordered, her voice as sharp as Marcinko's. They moved. Through collapsed buildings and streets littered with burned-out cars, Sarah led them deeper into enemy territory. At times, Marcinko caught the look in his men's eyes. The disbelief was gone, replaced by something else, an unspoken trust forming despite themselves. She had saved them more than once already, and her instincts seemed otherworldly. But the night was far from finished. Their mission, to secure a hidden weapons cache rumored to supply the insurgents, dragged them to the very heart of the city. The closer they moved, the heavier the resistance. Explosions rocked the ground, dust filled the air, and gunfire rattled from every direction. Sarah was relentless, her presence steady even as chaos unfolded. At one point, when the SEALs were cornered in a narrow alley with no clear exit, Sarah pressed her hand against the wall, scanning the cracked bricks with her eyes. Without a word, she slammed her boot into a weak spot, revealing a hidden passage into the adjacent structure. "In!" she ordered. No hesitation. They followed, bursting into cover just as the alley behind them was torn apart by RPG fire. The men looked at her differently now. The woman they had doubted, mocked in whispers, was the reason they were still alive. Hours bled together, the firefight unending. The city felt alive, resisting every step. Yet Sarah guided them through, her rifle never missing, her judgment never faltering. Finally, they reached the weapons cache, buried in a half-collapsed warehouse. The insurgents guarding it were entrenched, firing relentlessly. For the first time, Marcinko considered pulling back. The odds were brutal, but Sarah only looked at him, her expression unreadable beneath the dirt and blood. "Cover me," she said simply. Before he could stop her, she moved. Sprinting through open fire, sliding into cover, her rifle cracked again and again. One by one, the defenders fell. The SEALs surged forward, inspired not by orders but by the courage she had carved into their hearts. Together, they stormed the warehouse, dismantling the stronghold piece by piece. By dawn, the cache was secured. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breathing of men who had survived against impossible odds. Marchenko stood among them, his gaze drawn to Sarah. She sat against the wall, reloading calmly, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. The phantom insignia on her vest caught the first light of morning. The seals were silent, but it wasn't the silence of doubt anymore. It was respect, heavy and unspoken. They had followed her through hell, and she had brought them out alive. Marchenko approached, his voice low. "You've done this before." She looked up at him, her eyes tired but unwavering. "More times than I'd like to count." He nodded slowly. No more questions. Some truths didn't need words. His men gathered their gear, preparing to leave, the city behind, but every one of them stole a glance at her before turning away. They would remember her, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it in blood and fire. As the helicopters lifted them from Fallujah's broken streets, Marchenko looked back one last time. Sarah Kane stood alone on the rooftop, watching the horizon. The insignia on her chest gleamed faintly in the rising sun, proof that the Phantom unit wasn't just a story. It lived, and it had walked with them that night. And deep down, Marchenko knew one thing for certain. They hadn't just fought beside a soldier, they had fought beside a legend.